In this week's episode of Tales of the Lone Wolf, I'm going to break down the 10 most important things you need to survive and thrive as an empowered lone wolf. Now, this video is going to be taking a direction that's going to be highlighting the difference between feminine and masculine energy. Because you might think that the lone wolf is only a masculine energy. Because many of you were surprised to hear myself, a woman, talking about being a lone wolf. And can women be lone wolves? Yes. One other thing that I will touch on here that's come up in my videos as well is the mention of it being a sigma wolf or an alpha wolf. And as I understand, the sigma is somebody who's more introverted, whereas the alpha is someone who's more extroverted. But I don't want you to get too attached to these sigma and alpha labels either. What I want you to embrace is the duality that the energy of both the feminine and the masculine need to be embraced for you to be an empowered lone wolf. When I look up the term lone wolf, I see things related to alpha and sigma males, but the lone wolf isn't just a male. It's a female too. So these terms can be a little bit of harmful programming, especially for men to attach themselves to. Harmful in a way that being seen as a sigma might show that you are much weaker and passive. While that might be true, so long as you embrace it from a healed masculine energy, then you're probably going to be way better off than the alpha male who is struggling to embrace their healed masculine and even more so feminine energies. So let's get to it. The 10 most important things you need to survive and thrive as an empowered lone wolf. As I go through these points, I'm going to be highlighting for you so you have a better understanding of what is considered a wounded energy versus a healed or empowered energy. Number one, releasing the victim mindset and taking more personal responsibility. When you're stuck thinking that everything is everyone else's fault, you automatically disempower yourself versus owning your path, owning your purpose, acknowledging that, yes, indeed, there are things that I cannot control, that I will never be able to change. But what I do know is that I am in control of myself and my own responses, and what I can change is what I am in control of. Number two, releasing the critical attitude that you have towards yourself, as well as releasing any critical attitude that you have towards anyone else. There needs to be more acceptance, more understanding, even if you don't agree. Being more open to learning and observing without judgment. These first 2 points that I mentioned focus on the wounded feminine energy. The wounded feminine energy often does a lot of talking. The wounded feminine energy often engages in unnecessary talking. And this talking is often from a negative viewpoint. Negative self-talk being at the top of that list. Number three, this comes from a wounded masculine energy. Rigid and controlling boundaries. Yes, as a lone wolf, we may have struggled to put up healthy boundaries for ourselves and with other people in our lives. And so you may get to a certain point where you become very rigid with what you will tolerate and what you will not tolerate. And to a certain degree, this is necessary. However, there needs to be a balance with self-compassion. There needs to be a balance with being more discerning. So on the one hand, you may have embraced a wounded masculine energy of being too rigid and controlling in your boundaries, or the wounded feminine energy where you absolutely have no boundaries and you allow anything to slide. Number four is, as I mentioned earlier, less talking, more doing. The getting into action is the healed, empowered masculine energy. They are doers. They are getting things done. Whereas the wounded feminine energy is being way too laid back, way too laissez-faire, way too, I'll get to it when I get to it. Instead of ruminating about what you have to do, getting into action. Instead of complaining about what other people are not doing right, going out there and doing it yourself. The healed masculine energy has a strong work ethic, strong level of self-determination, is very self-motivated. And yes, a lot of what the lone wolf is doing is on their own and are doing things on their own and are taking action on their own. So don't become resentful of it. Own it, embrace it. Number 5, more time connecting with nature. Remember, you're a lone wolf. You need to be out in nature amongst plants and other animals, and meditation, being able to have that calm, quiet, peaceful time to reflect. And as you've heard me talk about before, creativity and less time in gender conforming roles. Number 6, building your self-trust, building your self-reliance that is not based on the mistrust of others. Just because people have betrayed you, now I don't trust anyone. Now I must only trust myself. No, now you have landed yourself into a wounded male energy. You can trust others because you trust yourself. Saying that you're untrusting of others only reveals the lack of trust that you have in yourself. This can be an area that I will explore deeper, the area of trust, because I've heard many of you saying that you don't trust anyone, but it is possible to even trust the untrustworthy because you trust yourself, to know that you got your own back. That's what it always comes down to. That's that self-reliance. Number 7, releasing the idea that being dominant is a superpower. And I guess this is where the alpha male wounded energy comes into play. Instead, I want you to succumb to the truth that being disciplined instead, being consistent in your actions instead, matters much more than dominating. Number 8, you got to balance your time that you spend at work and the time that you spend playing, being creative, and enjoying nothingness. I know that you're probably drowning yourself in piles of work because you think that's what makes you happy, and maybe you even enjoy it. And yes, you might even be thriving in it and be very successful. But workaholism is a sign of a wounded masculine energy. It's also a trauma response. Those are many of these other behaviors that are wounded or coming from a place of trauma. And this blends into number 9, which is releasing the need to be competitive. You might have noticed this in your earlier years. And so as you've gotten older, there's a tendency for you to really ease up on this one. Because as a survival skill, we probably were operating from a lot of wounded masculine energy just to get by. And so competition was fierce. But as you've traveled along the path and gone along this journey for decades and decades now, you've come to realize that that is no longer necessary. You've learned how to drop your guard in certain respects. And that competition, the only person that you're in competition with is yourself. Part of the empowered and healed masculine energy is when you can actually really learn to take risks and make mistakes, understanding that this is how we learn and that I can accept that I'm not going to be perfect. I can accept that I'm going to make mistakes, and I can accept that I'm going to lose, and then I'm going to lose a lot. And that's part of life. And number 10, improving the way you communicate with other people about your feelings. Instead of being cold and distant, it doesn't mean you have to be overly warm and welcoming either. For the lone wolf, we don't want to find ourselves in these extremes, in this black and white thinking. We want to be able to come to the middle path. We want to be able to find a place of neutrality. The healed feminine energy will process their emotions on a deeper and more meaningful level than any other person will do. For the male lone wolf, if they're not embracing their feminine energy on this, they will suffer and become fearful of attachments, which will have them becoming more avoidant, which only makes them more lonely. Instead of being avoidant with others, we don't have to be overly anxious with them either. Can feel this sense of safety and security. And that is walking the middle path, because the avoidant is coming from a wounded masculine energy. The anxious is coming from a wounded feminine energy. So where is the empowered state? Is in that safety and security. And for the lone wolf, they have already lost a lot of people from their life. And by whatever means that has happened, it's good practice now to start to vocalize yourself. So if there's someone in your life right now that you feel is not walking the same path as you are and you need to veer off, not giving them a silent treatment, not being cold and distant and avoidant, not taking that route, and instead practicing to vocalize yourself by expressing your needs, by letting them know that it's been a pleasure walking this path with you. But now it's time for me to go on my way. And being okay that they might not be okay with that. We have endured this experience many times already. So now it's time to embrace that. And that's what I mean when having that sense of safety and security, that all of these choices that you're making are in your best interest. And it's okay for you to express them because that is you doing your sort of due diligence. That is you coming from a healthy masculine energy. And it doesn't matter whether they agree or not. That is their opportunity to address their own wounds, which people will do in time or they won't. That is not up to you. So thank you for tuning in to another episode of Tales of the Lone Wolf, and good luck with your path towards balancing and empowering those masculine and feminine traits that live within every lone wolf.